diligently. Direct communication. The spirit of direct communication is how the true way of the Nito Ichi school is received and handed down. Oral tradition, teach your body's strategy. Recorded in the above book is an outline of Ichi school sword fighting. To learn how to win with the long sword and strategy, first learn the 5 approaches and the 5 attitudes, and absorb the way of the long sword naturally in your body. You must understand spirit and timing, handle the long sword naturally, and move body and legs in harmony with your spirit. Whether beating 1 man or 2, you will then know values in strategy. Study the contents of this book, taking 1 item at a time, and through fighting with your enemies, you will gradually come to know the principle of the way. Deliberately, with a patient spirit, absorb the virtue of all this, from time to time raising your hand in combat. Maintain this spirit whenever you cross swords with an enemy. Step by step, walk the 1,000-mile road. Study strategy over the years and achieve the spirit of the warrior. Today is victory over yourself of yesterday. Tomorrow is your victory over lesser men. Next, in order to beat more skillful men, train according to this book, not allowing your heart to be swayed along a sidetrack. Even if you kill an enemy, if it is not based on what you have learned, it is not the true way. The 2nd year of Shouho, the 12th day of the 5th month, 1645, signed Shinmen Musashi. The Fire Book. In this, the Fire Book of the Nito Ichi School of Strategy, I describe fighting as fire. In the first place, people think narrowly about the benefit of strategy. By using only their fingertips, they only know the benefit of 3 of the 5 inches of the wrist. They let a contest be decided, as with the folding fan, merely by the span of their forearms. They specialize in the small matter of dexterity, learning such trifles as hand and leg movements with the bamboo practice sword. In my strategy, the training for killing enemies is by way of many contests. Fighting for survival, discovering the meaning of life and death, learning the way of the sword, judging the strength of attacks, and understanding the way of the edge and ridge of the sword. You cannot profit from small techniques, particularly when full armor is worn. My way of strategy is the sure method to win when fighting for your life 1 man against 5 or 10. There is nothing wrong with the principle 1 man can beat 10, so 1,000 men can beat 10,000. You must research this. Of course, you cannot assemble 1,000 or 10,000 men for everyday training. But you can become a master of strategy by training alone with a sword, so that you can understand the enemy's stratagems, his strength and resources, and come to appreciate how to apply strategy to beat 10,000 enemies. Any man who wants to master the essence of my strategy must research diligently, training morning and evening. Thus can he polish his skill, become free from self, and realize extraordinary ability. He will come to possess miraculous power. This is the practical result of strategy. Depending on the place. Examine your environment. Stand in the sun, that is, take up an attitude with the sun behind you. If the situation does not allow this, you must try to keep the sun on your right side. In buildings, you must stand with the entrance behind you or to your right. Make sure that your rear is unobstructed and that there is free space on your left, your right side being occupied with your sword attitude. At night, if the enemy can be seen, keep the fire behind you and the entrance to your right, and otherwise take up your attitude as above. You must look down on the enemy and take up your attitude on slightly higher places. For example, the camisa, or spiritual center in a house, is thought of as a high place. When the fight comes, Always endeavor to chase the enemy around to your left side. Chase him toward awkward places and try to keep him with his back to awkward places. When the enemy gets into an inconvenient position, do not let him look around, but conscientiously chase him around and pin him down. In houses, chase the enemy into the thresholds, lintels, doors, verandas, pillars, and so on, again not letting him see his situation. Always chase the enemy into bad footholds, obstacles at the side, and so on, using the virtues of the place to establish predominant positions from which to fight. You must research and train diligently in this. The 3 methods to forestall the enemy. A great swordsman, or any other artist, will have mastered the ability to forestall the enemy. The great swordsman is always before his environment. This does not mean speed. You cannot beat a good swordsman because he subconsciously sees the origin of every real action. It is the practiced ability to sum up a changing situation instantly. The first is to forestall him by attacking. This is called ken no sen, to set him up. Another method is to forestall him as he attacks. This is called tai no sen, to wait for the initiative. The other method is when you and the enemy attack together. This is called tai no sen, to accompany him and forestall him. There are no methods of taking the lead other than these 3. Because you can win quickly by taking the lead, it is one of the most important things in strategy. There are several things involved in taking the lead. You must make the best of the situation, see through the enemy's spirit so that you grasp his strategy and defeat him. It is impossible to write about this in detail. The first, ken no sen. When you decide to attack, keep calm and dash in quickly, forestalling the enemy. Or you can advance seemingly strongly, but with a reserved spirit, forestalling him with the reserve. Alternatively, advance with as strong a spirit as possible, and when you reach the enemy, move with your feet a little quicker than normal, unsettling him and overwhelming him sharply. Or with your spirit calm, attack with a feeling of constantly crushing the enemy from first to last. The spirit is to win in the depths of the enemy. These are all ken no sen. The second, tai no sen. When the enemy attacks, remain undisturbed, but feign weakness. As the enemy reaches you, suddenly move away, indicating that you intend to jump aside. Then dash in, attacking strongly as soon as you see the enemy relax. This is one way. Or as the enemy attacks, attack still more strongly, taking advantage of the resulting disorder in his timing to win. This is the tai no sen principle. The third, tai no sen. When the enemy makes a quick attack, you must attack strongly and calmly. Aim for his weak point as he draws near, and strongly defeat him. Or, if the enemy attacks calmly, you must observe his movement, and with your body rather floating, join in with his movement as he draws near. Move quickly, and cut him strongly. This is tai no sen. These things cannot be clearly explained in words. You must research what is written here. In these 3 ways of forestalling, you must judge the situation. This does not mean that you always attack first. But if the enemy attacks first, you can lead him around. In strategy, you have effectively won when you forestall the enemy, so you must train well to attain this. To hold down a pillow. To hold down a pillow means not allowing the enemy's head to rise. In contests of strategy, it is bad to be led about by the enemy. You must always be able to lead the enemy about. Obviously, the enemy will also be thinking of doing this, but he cannot forestall you if you do not allow him to come out. In strategy, you must stop the enemy as he attempts to cut. You must push down his thrust and throw off his hold when he tries to grapple. This is the meaning of to hold down a pillow. When you have grasped this principle, Whatever the enemy tries to bring about in the fight, you will see in advance and suppress it. The spirit is to check his attack at the syllable at. When he jumps, check his jump at the syllable j, and check his cut at ka. The important thing in strategy is to suppress the enemy's useful actions, but allow his useless actions. However, doing this alone is defensive. First, you must act according to the way. Suppress the enemy's techniques, foiling his plans, and thence command him directly. When you can do this, you will be a master of strategy. You must train well and research, holding down a pillow. Crossing at a ford. Crossing at a ford means, for example, crossing the sea at a strait, or crossing over 100 miles of broad sea at a crossing place. I believe this crossing at a ford occurs often in a man's lifetime. It means setting sail, even though your friends stay in harbor, knowing the route, knowing the soundness of your ship, and the favor of the day. When all the conditions are met, and there is perhaps a favorable wind or a tailwind, then set sail. If the wind changes within a few miles of your destination, you must row across the remaining distance without sail. If you attain this spirit, it applies to everyday life. You must always think of crossing at a ford. In strategy, also it is important to cross at a ford. Discern the enemy's capability, and knowing your own strong points, cross the ford at the advantageous place, as a good captain crosses a sea route. If you succeed in crossing at the best place, you may take your ease. To cross at a ford means to attack the enemy's weak point and to put yourself in an advantageous position. This is how to win in large-scale strategy. The spirit of crossing at a ford is necessary in both large and small-scale strategy. You must research this well. To know the times. To know the times means to know the enemy's disposition in battle. Is it flourishing or waning? By observing the spirit of the enemy's men and getting the best position, you can work out the enemy's disposition and move your men accordingly. You can win through this principle of strategy, fighting from a position of advantage. When in a duel, you must forestall the enemy and attack when you have first recognized his school of strategy, perceived his quality and his strong and weak points. Attack in an unsuspected manner, knowing his meter and modulation and the appropriate timing. Knowing the times means, if your ability is high, seeing right into things. If you are thoroughly conversant with strategy, you will recognize the enemy's intentions and thus have many opportunities to win. You must sufficiently study this. To tread down the sword. To tread down the sword is a principle often used in strategy. First, in large-scale strategy, when the enemy first discharges bows and guns and then attacks, it is difficult for us to attack if we are busy loading powder into our guns or notching our arrows. The spirit is to attack quickly while the enemy is still shooting with bows or guns. The spirit is to win by treading down as we receive the enemy's attack. In single combat, we cannot get a decisive victory by cutting with a ti-dum feeling in the wake of the enemy's attacking long sword. We must defeat him at the start of his attack, in the spirit of treading him down with the feet, so that he cannot rise again to the attack. Treading does not simply mean treading with the feet. Tread with the body, tread with the spirit, and of course, tread and cut with the long sword. You must achieve the spirit of not allowing the enemy to attack a second time. This is the spirit of forestalling in every sense. Once at the enemy, you should not aspire just to strike him, but to cling after the attack. You must study this deeply. To know collapse. In large-scale strategy, when the enemy starts to collapse, you must pursue him without letting the chance go. If you fail to take advantage of your enemy's collapse, they may recover. You must understand how to utterly cut down the enemy. To become the enemy. To become the enemy means to think yourself into the enemy's position. In single combat, also you must put yourself in the enemy's position. If you think, here is a master of the way who knows the principles of strategy, then you will surely lose. You must consider this deeply. To release four hands. To release four hands is used when you and the enemy are contending with the same spirit and the issue cannot be decided. It is a deadlock. Abandon this spirit and win through an alternative resource. When there is a four hands spirit, do not give up. It is man's existence. Immediately throw away this spirit and win with a technique the enemy does not expect. In single combat also, when we think we have fallen into the four hands situation, we must defeat the enemy by changing our mind and applying a suitable technique according to his condition. You must be able to judge this. To move the shade. To move the shade is used when you cannot see the enemy's spirit. In large-scale strategy, when you cannot see the enemy's position, indicate that you are about to attack strongly to discover his resources. In single combat, if the enemy takes up a rear or side attitude of the long sword so that you cannot see his intention, feign an attack, and the enemy will show his long sword, thinking he sees your spirit. Benefiting from what you are shown, you can win with certainty. If you are negligent, you will miss the timing. Research this well. To hold down a shadow. Holding down a shadow is used when you can see the enemy's attacking spirit. When the enemy embarks on an attack, make a show of strongly suppressing his technique, and he will change his mind. Then, altering your spirit, defeat him by forestalling him with a void spirit. To pass on. Many things are said to be passed on. Sleepiness can be passed on, and yawning can be passed on. Time can be passed on also. In single combat, you can win by relaxing your body and spirit, and then catching on to the moment when the enemy relaxes. Attack strongly and quickly, forestalling him. What is known as getting someone drunk is similar to this. You can also infect the enemy with a bored, careless, or weak spirit. To cause loss of balance. Many things can cause a loss of balance. One cause is danger, another is hardship, and another is surprise. You must research this. In strategy, it is important to cause loss of balance. Or in single combat, start by making a show of being slow. Then attack strongly, without allowing him space for breath to recover from the fluctuation of spirit. You must grasp the opportunity to win. To frighten. Fright often occurs caused by the unexpected. In large-scale strategy, you can frighten the enemy not just by what you present to their eyes, but by shouting, making a small force seem large, or by threatening them from the flank without warning. These things all frighten. You can win by making best use of the enemy's frightened rhythm. To soak in. When you have come to grips and are striving together with the enemy, and you realize that you cannot advance, you soak in and become one with the enemy. You can win by applying a suitable technique while you are mutually entangled. To injure the corners. It is difficult to move strong things by pushing directly, so you should injure the corners. In large-scale strategy, it is beneficial to strike at the corners of the enemy's force. If the corners are overthrown, the spirit of the whole body will be overthrown. To defeat the enemy, you must follow up the attack when the corners have fallen. In single combat, it is easy to win once the enemy collapses. This happens when you injure the corners of his body and thus weaken him. To throw into confusion. This means making the enemy lose resolve. Victory is certain when the enemy is caught up in a rhythm which confuses his spirit. We can confuse the enemy by attacking with varied techniques when the chance arises. Feint a thrust or cut, or make the enemy think that you are going to close with him. And when he is confused, you can easily win. We can make him think, here, there, like that, like this, slow, fast. This is the essence of fighting, and you must research it deeply. To mingle. In battles, when the armies are in confrontation, attack the enemy's strong points, and when you see that they are beaten back, quickly separate and attack yet another strong point on the periphery of his force. The spirit of this is like a winding mountain path. This is an important fighting method for one man against many. What is meant by mingling is the spirit of advancing and becoming engaged with the enemy and not withdrawing even one step. You must understand this. To crush. This means to crush the enemy regarding him as being weak. If the enemy is less skillful than ourself, if his rhythm is disorganized, or if he has fallen into evasive or retreating attitudes, crush him straight away. The primary thing is to not let him recover his position even a little. The mountain sea change. The mountain sea spirit means that it is bad to repeat the same thing several times when fighting the enemy. There may be no help but to do something twice, but do not try it a third time. If the enemy thinks of the mountains, attack like the sea. And if he thinks of the sea, attack like the mountains. To penetrate the depths. When we are fighting with the enemy, even when it can be seen that we can win on the surface with the benefit of the way, if his spirit is not extinguished, he may be beaten superficially, yet undefeated in spirit deep inside. With this principle of penetrating the depths, we can destroy the enemy's spirit in its depths, demoralizing him by quickly changing our spirit. If the enemy remains spirited, it is difficult to crush him. To renew. To renew applies when we are fighting with the enemy and an entangled spirit arises where there is no possible resolution. We must abandon our efforts, think of the situation in a fresh spirit, then win it in the new rhythm. Rat's head, ox's neck. We must always think of the way of strategy as being both a rat's head and an ox's neck. Whenever we have become preoccupied with small details, we must suddenly change into a large spirit, interchanging large with small. The commander knows the troops. The commander knows the troops applies everywhere in fights in my way of strategy. Using the wisdom of strategy, think of the enemy as your own troops. When you think in this way, you can move him at will and be able to chase him around. The body of a rock. When you have mastered the way of strategy, you can suddenly make your body like a rock, and 10,000 things cannot touch you. This is the body of a rock. You will not be moved. Oral tradition. This book is a spiritual guide for the man who wishes to learn the way. The true way of sword fencing is the craft of defeating the enemy in a fight, and nothing other than this. If you attain and adhere to the wisdom of my strategy, you need never doubt that you will win. The 2nd year of Shoho, the 5th month, the 12th day, 1645, signed, Shinmen Musashi. The Wind Book. In strategy, you must know the ways of other schools. So I have written about various other traditions of strategy in this, the Wind Book. Without knowledge of the ways of other schools, it is difficult to understand the essence of my Ichi school. Looking at other schools, we find some that specialize in techniques of strength, using extra long swords. Some schools study the way of the short sword, known as kodachi. Some schools teach dexterity in large numbers of sword techniques, teaching attitudes of the sword as the surface and the way as the interior. That none of these are the true way, I show clearly in the interior of this book. All the vices and virtues and rights and wrongs. My Ichi school is different. Other schools make accomplishments their means of livelihood, growing flowers and decoratively coloring articles in order to sell them. This is definitely not the way of strategy. Some of the world's strategists are concerned only with sword fencing and limit their training to flourishing the long sword and carriage of the body. But is dexterity alone sufficient to win? This is not the essence of the way. I have recorded the unsatisfactory points of other schools one by one in this book. You must study these matters deeply to appreciate the benefit of my Nito Ichi school. Other schools using extra-long swords. Some other schools have a liking for extra-long swords. From the point of view of my strategy, these must be seen as weak schools. This is because they do not appreciate the principle of cutting the enemy by any means. Their preference is for the extra-long sword, and relying on the virtue of its length, they think to defeat the enemy from a distance. In this world, it is said, 1 inch gives the hand advantage. But these are the idle words of someone who does not know strategy. It shows the inferior strategy of a weak spirit that men should be dependent upon the length of their sword, fighting from a distance without the benefit of strategy. From olden times it has been said, great and small go together. So do not unconditionally dislike extra-long swords. What I dislike is the inclination toward the long sword only. If we consider large-scale strategy, we can think of large forces in terms of long swords, and small forces as short swords. Cannot few men give battle against many? There are many instances of few men overcoming many. In my doctrine, I dislike preconceived narrow spirit. You must study this well. The strong long sword spirit in other schools. If you are concerned with the strength of your sword, you will try to cut unreasonably strongly and will not be able to cut at all. It is also bad to try to cut strongly when testing the sword. Whenever you cross swords with an enemy, you must not think of cutting him either strongly or weakly. Just think of cutting and killing him. Be intent solely upon killing the enemy. Do not try to cut strongly and, of course, do not think of cutting weakly. You should only be concerned with killing the enemy. If you rely on strength, when you hit the enemy's sword, you will inevitably hit too hard. If you do this, your own sword will be carried along as a result. Thus the saying, the strongest hand wins, has no meaning. Without the correct principle, the fight cannot be won. Use of the shorter long sword in other schools. Using a shorter long sword is not the true way to win. Some men use a shorter long sword with the intention of jumping in and stabbing the enemy at the unguarded moment when he flourishes his sword. This inclination is bad. To aim for the enemy's unguarded moment is completely defensive and undesirable at close quarters with the enemy. Furthermore, you cannot use the method of jumping inside his defense with a short sword if there are many enemies. By their study of strategy, people of the world get used to countering, evading, and retreating as the normal thing. They become set in this habit, so can easily be paraded around by the enemy. The way of strategy is straight and true. You must chase the enemy around and make him obey your spirit. Other schools with many methods of using the long sword. I think it is held in other schools that there are many methods of using the long sword in order to gain the admiration of beginners. This is selling the way. It is a vile spirit in strategy. Anyway, cutting down the enemy is the way of strategy, and there is no need for many refinements of it. There are 5 methods in 5 directions. Methods apart from these 5 hand-twisting, body-bending, jumping out and so on to cut the enemy are not in the true way of strategy. This is completely useless. In my strategy, I bear my spirit and